Welcome to Stories That Matter. I am your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest today, Pat McDonald. You would know her differently than that unless you're living in our little community here. And first off, Pat, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I was just floored to get the invitation, and I'm so glad I could come.
Well, I appreciate it. We read an article in the newspaper about your books, your writings, about yourself, and it was a delight. I said, we invite people from hundreds of miles away to come in, and we shoot a Zoom program or we shoot a live program, and I said, here's Pat right here in our backyard. I did not know those things about you. Well, and it very interesting.
Yeah, I'm a well-kept secret.
Yeah, okay, that's good, but if you use the name that you use, Patricia Davids.
Yes.
That's
my pen name.
That's your pen name. And you have written 43?
The novel, and I think I have 10 novellas maybe, so closer to 55 books.
And you've sold something over 3 million copies?
3 million, at least 3 million, yeah.
That's amazing. I'm anxious to hear this story.
Oh, I'm happy to share.
Tell me about yourself.
Well, first off, I'm a grandmother. I have one grandson and one granddaughter, and the Lord loved me. He just gave me one child. I have one daughter, and I was always a great wife, a great nurse. As a mother, but as a grandmother, I excel. So I'm happy to say that. I grew up on a farm just south of Chapman. I attended Chapman High School. I graduated in 1970, and so you can figure out how old I am, as if my white hair doesn't give me away. And I grew up with 4 brothers on a farm. My passion was riding horses, and I went away to college because nobody was willing to marry me, which is what girls did back in the 70s. They got married or they went to school. So I became a nurse and stumbled into the best career ever. I became a neonatal nurse, taking care of premature babies. And that was truly my calling in life. I said, God gave me the ability to heal people with my hands. And so I took care of them. Many of our babies were so small, the smallest, her head would sit in the palm of my hand and her feet would dangle over, her knees would dangle over my fingers. And you can't tell me that is not a living being from the time of conception, but that's another issue.
And you are exactly right. Show me that hand again, because as you would take those little ones, it would sit right here in your hand, like that. And you had an absolute love for those people.
I did.
That's why you went to the college for it, and that's why you did that for many, many years.
I did.
And many of the books that you have written has that softness, that kindness, that gentleness that goes with the heart that you have.
Right. So I was an avid reader for many years, and my husband was also. We read numerous books. Every week I would go to the bookstore, and I finished one book one day, and it was a terrible ending. Which is a terrible ending, and I said, I could write a better story than that. And my husband said, okay, I think you'd be good at that. So I wrote and wrote and wrote. I wrote my first chapter, and I gave it to my husband to read, and he said, this is good. And I thought, I have talent. Who knew? And I then wrote and wrote and wrote the second chapter, and I gave it to my husband, and he goes, well, this is filler. So not exactly what I was aiming for.
Well, ouch, huh?
Yes, that was kind of an ouch. So I thought, okay, there's more to writing a book than I know. So back in those days, pre-computer, I went to the library and I checked out books on how to write a novel, and they all said the same thing, to join a local writers group. So my love was romance novels, so I found the Wichita area romance authors and joined them in the National Organization of Romance Writers of America. And I began to learn about the craft and the business of writing. It's a very strange business. But I finished my first novel, and I was able to get an agent very quickly, which is, as new writers know, it's very difficult to land, harder to get an agent than it is to get a publisher. They're the gatekeepers for the publishers now, and so they see a lot of manuscripts. But back in the day when you had to write them, I had to write it on a word processor and package up the manuscript and mail it off and wait months to hear. Now you just email it and you get back a yes or no back very quickly.
But back then, would the publishers even take a book from you if you didn't have an agent?
No.
So they would just,
yeah,
some amateur, and they wouldn't bother to read it?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And so, did you finish that first book? And
I did not. I went to my first writers group and I listened to these other writers who I was just in awe of, although I didn't know at the time none of them were published. And one woman said to me, "Oh, no one's buying historicals," because it was a historical novel. "No one's buying historicals. They only want stories about cowboys, kids, and cats." I thought, okay, I can write one of those. and so I did. And to give the hero and the heroine conflict, he's a Flint Hills rancher. She's a New York ballerina. So what do those two possibly have in common?
Very little, you would think, wouldn't you?
You would think, but I made it work. And I had, he had twin daughters, and he had a cat named Bonkers. And so that was my first story that I shopped out there for, and my agent, and it took us, 7-8 years to find a publisher who was willing. Nobody wanted to buy that one. But in the meantime, I had written more. I'd written other books, and because I would get rejection letters, and then I would say, "You know what? I have talent. I'm going to be published someday." That's just the way it's going to be.
Well, you would expect in that business that there would be rejection letters.
You would think, but I was too naive to really expect that. Yeah,
it all hurts.
It does. It just made me more determined.
What did you use for your pen name?
I used my pen name, Patricia Davids, evolved out of the fact that when I sold my first novel, my agent said, "Do you want to write under your own name?" And I said, "Patricia McDonald is already a well-known suspense author, and I don't want to confuse people." So I said to my husband, "Look, honey, if I just take your name and put an S behind it, Davids, and alphabetically, I will be forever known as Davids Patricia. Isn't that sweet?" And he said, "I think you should be Patty Lovemore." And I had sold my first book as an inspirational, and I said, "I don't think she writes inspirational novels." But the reason I got into inspirational rather than secular romance was when I finished my first book about the cowboy kids and cats. I gave it to my mother to read, because who's going to love your stuff? Your mother's going to love it.
Yeah, nobody will love it more.
Nobody will love it more. And she said, "Patty, this is a good book, but I could never let your father read it because it had a love scene in it." And I said, "Oh," she says, "write something my friends can read."
You must have had quite a love scene in it.
Well, I didn't think it was that bad. But sometimes we don't listen to God because he sounds just like our mother. And so I said, "Oh, I can write a book without a love scene." And so the woman was in a coma for the first half of the book, and that's not really a romance novel. And I went, my romance writers group had Deborah Rainey as a speaker. And I don't know if you know her. She's from the Heston area. She writes inspirational romance. She's very popular. And she talked about the inspirational romance market, and I was unfamiliar with it. And so I said to my agent, I said, "Let's try that. They like nice people." My rejection letter said my hero was too nice a guy.
Oh, okay.
They wanted tougher alpha males that, back in the 70s, it was the thing to have a real mean guy be saved by it was a relationship with a heroine. And I started out writing about nice guys. And so we sent. I rewrote the book and sent it out as an inspirational, and I got rejection. And then Joan Marlowe Golan at what was then Steeple Hill for Harlequin said, "I like your voice, but I need you to change some things about this story."
What you want you to change?
She wanted me to, first of all, the hero and heroine couldn't live in the same house without a chaperone. He was a firefighter. He had saved this girl who had a premature baby, and she was homeless, so he gave her a place to live. And he's a nice guy. And they said, no, you can't do that. And then he had a mother. His mother was deceased, and he had 3 sisters, and they all had an opinion about him letting this young woman in his life. And so she said, one of her sisters doesn't seem real. Cut her out. And I thought, okay. So here's a 30-year-old man who needs a chaperone. Where do I get that? And I said, I'll resurrect his mother. Because when you write a book, you can play God.
That's right.
And so I resurrected his mother, and I gave her all the lines that one of his sisters that I was going to cut could say. And so the same, she had her opinions about this young woman. And I was a 90,000 word book, and I had to cut it to 75,000 words. So I had to cut a lot of words out of it. And then she said yes. And so that's how Patricia Davids was born.
And that's your pen name?
That's my first, the pen name. And my first book was called His Bundle of Love. It was about a woman who had a premature baby, and I knew a lot about that.
Yes, you did, because of your education and your, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you have been writing books. Did you write on a regular 2, 3 a year, 1 a year?
3 a year. 3
a year?
The average, 3 a year. I once did 5 a year, which was very difficult. But I tried to maintain at least 3 a year. I write for category romance, and these books are out for just 30 days. They're on the shelf. Actually, 28 days they're on the shelf. And so you have just 28 days. Then they're stripped, and a new set for Love Inspired comes out. And what I do is, in order to be in the public eye, you have to get at least 3 books a year, because your window is so short for people to learn who you are.
And that's important, to recognize the name, and they'll say, oh, I read this from her. And that really would make sense. And I have a number of questions for you, because you were talking about you went to a book club. Was that the Wichita group?
Yes.
Okay. And then your first agent, who was your first agent?
Pam Hopkins of Hopkins Literary Agency in Rochester, New York.
How did you make connections with her that she would be that agent who would get the books into the hands of the publishers?
I was at a writers group meeting, and we had a writer from Oklahoma who had Pam as her agent, and she handed out Pam's card. And I contacted her to see if she would be interested in looking at some material from me, and she said yes.
Do you have an agent now?
Yes, she's still my agent.
Oh, she's your agent?
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. So that's been a number of years.
That's been a long time. Yes, more than most people are married.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I appreciate the books. These are nice books. I haven't read any of them yet. I've scanned one that I had, and it was, as your husband would say, it was very good.
Oh, good.
Very good.
I'm glad you liked it.
And to be successful enough to sell 3 million plus books, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
I just finished a book called Christmas on His Doorstep, which is an Amish story that will be out in late November, I think. The sequel to this book will be out in October. That sequel is called A Match Made at Christmas. And so I've recently finished that, and that's all I've got going right now.
Has your agent indicated to you that there may be a possibility at some point in time in the future that there would be some television?
You know, of course, Harlequin is a huge company, and they do have their own production company, movie. But the problem with writing Amish is that it's an American phenomenon. There are a few Amish in Canada and some in Central America, but there are no European Amish, no Amish in England. And so the books don't have an appeal to a wider market. If they're going to make a movie, they want to be able to sell it in Italy and in England and various places. So they have said that they have no current need to make a book. Now, there have been some fortunate authors who've had their Amish books turned into movies, and I'm very happy for them. But I don't think that's in my future.
Okay. Where did you grow up at?
Just south of Chapman here, about 20 miles.
Okay, not too far from where you
No.
settled. You and your husband settled at Enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay.
My husband and I lived in Wichita. I moved to Enterprise. My husband died in 2011, and that's when I transitioned from being a nurse to writing full time. I moved up to help take care of my parents, who were getting elderly. They lived just outside of Navarre, Kansas, and my mom passed away, and my dad required more help. So I stayed there for a few years until Dad went into a nursing home, and then I got my own place in the country and have been happily writing there ever since.
Okay. Now, let me ask you some obvious questions to me. They may not be to you, but back when you're a young kid growing up in the area here, and then you go to high school in Chapman, was it ever on your radar screen that, hey, you know, I will become this person, this will be my pen name, I'm going to write 44 books? Did you ever, was that even something you said, I think I'll be a nurse for a while, and then what I'll do is I'll retire from that and I'll go writing books?
Nope, didn't think about it. Some people want to be writers from the time they're little. That was not me. I come from a family of oral storytellers. We just had some marvelous storytellers in my family, and so I grew up with that tradition. And at the nursery, you know, they would say, Pat, what happened? You know, what happened today? And I could spin a story about what had happened. And it wasn't until I was an adult and my husband was disabled and I needed to make some extra money without getting another job, and I thought I could make a living maybe writing books.
Well,
it
you
seemed
obviously
easy.
did. Yeah,
It wasn't.
Well, no, it is not easy.
It is not easy.
And I get the privilege to do some articles and some things, and I tell people the ones that I do are on the religious page in the local newspaper on Fridays. And so people say, well, that was really a good one. And I say, you know, I can tell you which ones the good Lord inspired me to write, and I can tell you which ones I wasn't inspired and I wrote. Mine aren't very good.
Yeah,
His are very good.
Very good. Yeah.
And did you? How did you go about? Okay, I need to write a book because I need to write a book. How did you get motivated to do it? How did you pick out the topic, the characters' names, the storyline? How did you do that?
Oh, people always ask me where I get my ideas, and I tell them I go to the idea store. They're usually $5 for $1.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, might be a different store than I've been going to.
And I'm always amazed that there are people who do not have characters and stories bouncing around in their brain looking for a way out. The characters just come to me. I guess that's just God's way of keeping me entertained. I start thinking about, this would make a good story, and what should his name be, and what should he do for a living, and what does he want? What's his goal, and why does he want that? In writing, you'll always find goal, motivation, and conflict. What does he want? Why does he want it? Why can't he have it? And that's the basis of your story for hero and heroine. And then I just pick out something. You know, maybe I saw an alpaca, and I thought, those are so cute. Let me put an alpaca in a book about an Amish couple. Now, how's that going to work? Yeah, and it just does.
Did you have experience with the Amish
No.
people?
Nope. I had written a book about the Mounted Color Guard at Fort Riley. They're a reenacting group.
Yes, I'm familiar with them.
Yes. I'd written a series about them, 3 books about the Mounted Color Guard. And my editor in New York called me up and said, we've noticed how popular Amish books are becoming. And we looked around, and we don't have any writers in Pennsylvania, and we thought of you.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I said, okay.
And that's interesting stories that you have shared.
Thank
And we're going to put the contact information so these folks can
Okay.
go there and take a look at the 44 books that you've written, and maybe they'll find a book that works for them.
That'd be nice.
And I bet they will, because as I've scanned, they're very, very well written. You've done an awesome job.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being a nurse and how you have helped those little ones that would
Yeah.
sit in the palm of your hand. And thank you for sharing the expertise you have.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Pat, thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, you take care.
You too.
You've been watching Stories That Matter. Thank you.